At Thanksgiving dinner, my grandma leaned close, her hand trembling on mine, and whispered, "Leave now." I trusted her, and it saved my life. My name is Clara Jennings, and every year my family gathers at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. It's supposed to be a warm holiday, but for me it's always been a test. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the air tighten. Conversations slowed, eyes flicked toward me, and then everyone pretended nothing had happened. We sat around the long table, plates crowded with food, but the tension was sharper than the carving knife. My father asked me about work, not with kindness, but like he was trying to catch me in a lie. My cousin Hannah leaned back in her chair, whispering something to my uncle and laughing under her breath. My mother kept her eyes on her plate, shoulders stiff, as if she was scared to look up. I tried to eat quietly, to ignore the undercurrent buzzing through the room, but it was impossible. Every word spoken carried a hidden meaning. Every glance felt loaded. It was as though the entire table was waiting for something, and that something had to do with me. Then I felt it, a hand covering mine, gentle but firm. I looked to my right. My grandmother, Margaret, sat with her back straight, her eyes fixed on me. There was fear in them, a fear I had never seen from her before. She leaned close enough that no one else could hear, and her voice, barely a whisper, trembled. "Leave now." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. Leave? In the middle of dinner? But the urgency in her tone sent a jolt through me. She wasn't joking. She wasn't being dramatic. She was warning me. My pulse quickened. I set down my fork and forced my voice to stay steady. "I'm not feeling well," I said, pushing back my chair. The legs scraped against the floor, and the sound made everyone look up at once. Hannah stopped smirking. My father's jaw tightened. My mother froze mid-bite. The room went silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I stood, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. My hands shook, but I tried to hide it. "I think I need some air," I added, though no one asked. No one said a word as I walked to the door, but I could feel them watching me. Each step felt heavier, like I was dragging something invisible with me. I didn't dare look back until my hand was on the doorknob. And even then, I only glanced for a second, long enough to see every pair of eyes following me as I slipped out into the night. I drove away from the house, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. The headlights stretched across the dark road, and the further I went, the heavier the silence inside the car felt. My grandmother's whisper kept replaying in my head, over and over, until it blended with the hum of the engine. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to breathe steady, but nothing about this felt normal. I told myself I might have overreacted. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she saw I was uncomfortable and wanted to give me a way out. But no matter how I tried to reason it, I couldn't let go of the look in her eyes. That wasn't just worry. That was fear. As the miles passed, my thoughts pulled me backward, back into the years that made Thanksgiving so unbearable. My father, Douglas, had always been the center of the house. His word wasn't advice, it was law. He never asked, he commanded. Every choice I made seemed to offend him. Every step I took away from his approval turned into another fight. He made me feel like I was an outsider in my own family. My mother, Irene, never raised her voice. She rarely raised her eyes either. She sat quietly, nodding at his decisions, smiling faintly when people were watching, and then fading back into silence. I used to wait for her to step in, to defend me, but she never did. Her distance hurt worse than his anger. And then there was Hannah, my cousin. She knew exactly how to twist words until people saw me in the worst light. Sweet in front of others, poisonous when we were alone. She had a way of turning my mistakes into entertainment, of making me feel like the family punchline. If my father was the judge, she was the prosecutor, always building her case against me. Through all of it, the one steady hand had been my grandmother. Margaret never played sides. She listened when no one else would, slipped me little notes of encouragement, and looked at me like I wasn't broken. She never raised her voice, but somehow, her presence always softened the sharp edges of that house. That's why her warning hit so hard. She wasn't someone who panicked. If she told me to leave, there had to be a reason. I just didn't know what it was yet. I sat in my car outside my apartment for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, wondering if I had embarrassed myself, if I had made something out of nothing. The night pressed in quiet around me. I almost convinced myself to brush it off. Then in the distance, I heard sirens. At first faint, then growing louder. They tore through the calm of the night, racing down the road that led straight toward my parents' neighborhood. My chest tightened, and every doubt I had vanished. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. The next morning, I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when I heard a knock at my door. It was Mrs. Kane, my parents' neighbor, a woman who had known me since I was a kid. She stood on my porch with a worried face, holding her coat tight around her. "Clara, were you at your folks' place last night?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, but I left early." "Why?" Her eyes widened a little. "Good thing you did. After you left, it got bad over there. I heard shouting, things breaking. Then an ambulance pulled up. Someone was taken to the hospital. I don't know who, but it was chaos. The mug nearly slipped from my hand. I could picture the table, the silence when I stood up, the eyes following me as I walked out. I swallowed hard. Do you know what happened? She shook her head. All I know is the noise stopped as soon as the sirens did. But word is already going around. People are saying you started something before you stormed out. My chest tightened. That's not true, I said quickly, maybe too quickly. Mrs. Kane gave me a sympathetic look, but I could tell she wasn't sure what to believe. She patted my arm and said, "Well, I figured you should know." Then she left, leaving me standing in the doorway, the cold air rushing in behind her. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to make sense of her words. How could I be the cause when I wasn't even there? I left quietly, without raising my voice, without a single argument. And yet somehow, the story already had me at the center of the storm. I paced the room, guilt knotting in my stomach. Had I done the wrong thing by leaving? What if someone was hurt, and I could have stopped it? But then another thought cut through Grandma. She told me to go. She had been so certain, so urgent. Why? What had she known that I didn't? Hours passed with no answers. I couldn't bring myself to call the house. Every time I reached for my phone, I froze, afraid of who might pick up, afraid of what I might hear. Then, close to midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Grandma. She never called that late, and the sight of her name made my heart lurch. I answered on the first ring. Grandma? Her voice was hushed, almost like she was afraid someone might overhear. Clara, listen to me. You can't go back there. I sat down hard on the couch. What happened? Mrs. Kane said there was an ambulance. Don't ask questions right now, she cut me off. Just promise me you won't return to that house. They were planning something for you. That's why I told you to leave. You have to trust me. My throat went dry. Planning something? What are you talking about? I can't say on the phone, she whispered. Just stay away, please. Before I could press her for more, she ended the call. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking, my mind racing. Chaos at the house, rumors with my name in them, and my grandmother's urgent warning. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I couldn't sit with the questions any longer. The next day, I drove to my grandmother's house. Her small white cottage sat at the end of a quiet street, the curtains drawn tight. When she opened the door, her eyes darted up and down the road before she let me in, as if she was making sure no one had followed me. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of lavender. She motioned for me to sit, but her hands kept fidgeting. I'd never seen her like that before. My voice came out sharper than I meant. Grandma, I need you to tell me what's going on. Last night you said they were planning something. What did you mean? She sat down across from me, her shoulders sinking. For a moment she just looked at me, and then she said, Clara, I wasn't guessing. I heard them. Your father and Hannah. My stomach dropped. Heard them say what? She hesitated, pressing her hands together, then spoke slowly. They were talking in the study while everyone else was in the kitchen. They didn't know I was near the door. Douglas was telling Hannah that tonight would be the perfect chance. They planned to accuse you of stealing from the trust fund your grandfather left behind. I shook my head, the words heavy in my ears. That doesn't make sense. Why would they? They want you cut out completely, she said firmly. Douglas kept saying you were unfit and reckless, that you'd waste the money. Hannah agreed with him, but she was smiling the whole time. They weren't just talking about money, Clara. They wanted to humiliate you in front of everyone, to make sure no one would take your side when they cut you out. I stared at her, my chest tightening. So the whole dinner, it was a setup? Yes, she whispered. That's why I told you to leave. It wasn't just an argument waiting to happen. They were ready. Douglas said he had papers, statements, proof. I don't know how, but he meant to corner you at that table, make you look guilty before you could defend yourself. My hands clenched in my lap. Betrayal hit harder than anger. My father had spent years controlling me, but this was different. This was him deciding to erase me from the family altogether. And Hannah, she had always enjoyed making me small, but now I saw it clearly. She wanted what wasn't hers, and she was willing to help destroy me to get it. Grandma leaned forward and took my hand. You weren't safe in that house. That's why I had to warn you. They weren't just trying to hurt your feelings, Clara. They were trying to ruin your life. Her words sank in, sharp and cold. The whisper at the dinner table hadn't been about drama or tension. It had been about survival. If I had stayed, I would have walked straight into their trap. The days after talking with Grandma were heavy. I couldn't sleep, and when I did, I dreamed of sitting back at that table, every eye on me, waiting for the trap to spring. I kept telling myself it couldn't be true, that my own father wouldn't go that far. But the look on Grandma's face, the fear in her voice, wouldn't let me brush it away. I went digging. I needed to see for myself. At first, it was little things, odd letters that had come in the mail months earlier, bank statements addressed to me, but never opened because my father insisted on handling family matters. Then Grandma brought me an envelope she had taken from the study before Thanksgiving night. Inside were copies of account transfers with my name typed neatly at the bottom, like I had signed them. The signatures looked like mine, but I knew I had never touched those papers. My chest tightened as I flipped through page after page showing money drained from the trust fund. My father's handwriting was nowhere to be seen, but Hannah's neat printing filled the margins, notes about dates and amounts. They had forged everything, and it was detailed enough to look real. I dropped the papers on the table, my hands shaking. They wanted to make me the thief. Grandma nodded grimly. Yes, if you hadn't left that dinner, they would have put these in front of everyone. By the time you stood up for yourself, the damage would have been done. I thought about my mother then, Irene, sitting silent at the table, never daring to look at me. She must have known something. She always knew when my father was up to something, even if she never said it out loud. The realization cut deep. She had stayed quiet, letting him tear me apart rather than risk his anger. The betrayal settled over me like a weight I couldn't shake. My father, my cousin, even my mother in her silence, they had chosen to stand against me. It was like the ground had been pulled out from under my feet. For years I had wanted their approval, their acceptance, and now I saw clearly. They didn't want me in the family at all. I can't fight them, I whispered, my throat tight. He has control of everything. And Hannah, she's smarter than people think. They'll twist this until no one believes me. Grandma reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it. Don't you dare fall apart now. They want you broken, Clara. That's their game. But you're not broken. You're sharper than they realize, and you have the truth. If we move carefully, you can turn this on them. Her certainty startled me. I stared at her, the papers spread out like evidence of my family's lies, and felt something stir under the grief and anger. They had set me up, but Grandma was right. I didn't have to let them win. I knew if I wanted to survive this, I needed more than anger. I needed proof. Grandma agreed to help me, though I could see the worry in her eyes. One afternoon, while my parents were out, she led me into my father's study. The room smelled of old books and aftershave, everything lined up too neatly. She moved with practiced steps, opening drawers like she had done it before, and pointed me toward the bottom cabinet. My hands shook as I pulled out a stack of folders. Inside were bank statements, neat rows of numbers with my name stamped across them. But the dates didn't match anything I had ever signed. Transfers, withdrawals, large sums moved to accounts I didn't recognize. Each page carried the weight of accusation, yet none of it was mine. Grandma watched me closely. This is what they planned to use, she said softly. But look at the details. The signatures are too clean, the timing too perfect. I swallowed hard and kept digging. At the very back of the drawer was a receipt folder. My father never saved receipts, which made the bundle strained. Flipping through them, I saw bills for expensive clothes, spa treatments, and even a luxury trip booked under Hannah's name. My heart sank. While they painted me as reckless, Hannah was living on money stolen from the trust. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought of her smug smile at the dinner table, the way she had leaned back in her chair like she already owned everything. Now I understood why. She was spending freely, confident that I would take the blame when questions came. I spread the papers across the desk. The evidence was there, staring back at me. I had enough to show anyone willing to listen. But the weight of it pressed on me. If I confronted them too soon, they'd twist it again, find a way to bury me under their lies. If I waited too long, the damage might become permanent. I gathered the documents into a neat pile, my hands trembling. It's all here, I whispered. But how do I even begin to fight this? Grandma placed a steady hand on my shoulder, piece by piece. Don't rush. Let them think they still have control while you prepare. The truth will cut deeper if you use it at the right time. Her words made sense, but inside, I was unraveling. Every page reminded me that my own family had chosen to betray me. The rage burned hot, but the heartbreak was worse. These were the people I had once trusted with everything, the people I had wanted to believe loved me. As I packed the papers into a folder, I felt the fight building inside me, even as tears blurred my vision. Rage and sorrow twisted together, but I held on to one thought. If they wanted war, I wouldn't go down quietly. I didn't call ahead. I didn't warn anyone. I just drove straight to the house, the folder of papers on the passenger seat beside me. My chest felt tight the entire way, but my hands were steady. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the lights glowing in the windows. They were all home. I walked up the steps and pushed open the front door without knocking. The living room went quiet the second I stepped in. My father stood near the fireplace. Hannah lounged on the couch with a glass of wine, and my mother sat stiffly in her chair. Douglas's eyes narrowed. Well, look who decided to show her face. The ungrateful daughter. His voice dripped with anger. What do you want now? More drama? Haven't you embarrassed us enough? I didn't answer right away. I set the folder down on the coffee table and looked at him. I came for the truth. Hannah let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. Here we go again. Clara, you're obsessed. You left the dinner like a storm, and now you're trying to spin stories? You need help. Seriously. She leaned back, tilting her glass toward me like she was making a toast. Everyone sees it, you're unstable. Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened the folder and pulled out the bank statement. I spread them across the table, the papers sliding out in a messy line. Unstable doesn't explain forged signatures, I said coldly. Unstable doesn't explain Hannah's shopping sprees paid for with money from the trust. The room froze. My father's face flushed red. That's nonsense, he barked. You don't know what you're talking about. Those are family matters, private. You've always been reckless, Clara. And now you're making accusations without proof. I pointed at the receipts with Hannah's name printed on them. This is proof. Do you want me to read the dates out loud? They line up exactly with the withdrawals under my name. Hannah's smirk faltered, but she quickly put on a wounded expression, her voice trembling. She's making this up. Uncle Doug, don't let her do this to us. She's jealous because she's always been the outsider. She pressed her hand dramatically to her chest, her eyes shining with fake tears. I would never do something like this. The air felt heavy, the silence stretching between us. Then, unexpectedly, my mother's voice cut through. It was soft but clear. Stop. All eyes turned to her. Irene's hands were shaking in her lap, but she lifted her gaze at last. Her face was pale, her lips tight. She's telling the truth. Douglas snapped his head toward her. What did you just say? Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. I knew. I didn't say anything because I was afraid of you. But Clara is right. Those papers, they aren't hers. The room seemed to tilt. For the first time, the power shifted. My father's rage, Hannah's act, all of it cracked under the weight of my mother's quiet confession. I stood taller, the evidence in front of me, and knew this battle was no longer just mine. The moment my mother's words left her lips, the room broke apart. My father's face twisted with rage, the veins in his neck standing out. He slammed his fist against the fireplace mantel so hard a picture frame rattled. You dare stand against me? He roared, his voice shaking the wall. After everything I've built for this family, you take her side? She's a liar, a parasite. She doesn't deserve a cent. I didn't move. The papers were still spread across the table, and they spoke louder than his shouting. His anger no longer scared me. It only showed how much control he was losing. Hannah jumped to her feet, her face pale. She clutched her bag and tried to make for the door, muttering, I don't have to sit here and listen to this. But she didn't get far. My uncle, who had been silent until then, stepped into her path. His eyes flicked to the receipts in front of me and then back at her. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. Not until this is sorted out. Hannah froze, her confidence draining away. Her hands shook as she hugged her bag closer, like she could hide behind it. The rest of the family, who had gathered in the living room to watch the storm unfold, murmured among themselves. I caught words like proof and fraud passing through the crowd. One aunt leaned closer to another and whispered, It's all right there in black and white. The tide was turning. For once, they weren't looking at me with suspicion. They were looking at Douglas and Hannah. My father shouted again, this time at everyone. You're fools. All of you. She's twisting this, you can't see it? She's always been trouble. Always undermining me. But his voice cracked, and the power he had always carried with him seemed to falter. His fury made him look smaller, weaker, like a man who realized the ground under him was crumbling. Then Grandma rose from her chair. She walked slowly to my side and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Her presence filled the room in a way that silenced the whispers. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the chaos. Clara is telling the truth, she said. I heard them planning it myself, and now we have the evidence to prove it. No one can deny what's right in front of us. I felt the strength of her words settle over me. For years, I had felt alone in that house, but not in that moment. She stood with me, unshaken, while the rest of the family finally saw the truth. The room no longer belonged to Douglas or Hannah. Their plans were laid bare, their lies exposed. And for the first time, the weight of their betrayal began to shift off my shoulders. I wasn't standing there as their victim anymore. I was standing there with the truth on my side and Grandma beside me, making sure I wouldn't fall. The morning after the confrontation, I gathered every piece of paper and drove straight to a lawyer's office. My hands trembled as I slid the folder across the desk, but the lawyer's sharp eyes scanned the pages carefully. After a long silence, he looked up at me and said, This is more than enough to build a case. With his guidance, I filed reports. It felt unreal, putting my own father and cousin's names on official documents, but there was no other choice. They had forged my signature, stolen what wasn't theirs, and tried to destroy me in the process. It wasn't just a family fight anymore. It was a crime. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, signatures, and tense waiting. My stomach turned every time the phone rang, but slowly the case began to take shape. When the authorities finally stepped in, The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed louder in my mind than any of my father's old threats. Douglas was charged with fraud and forgery, and the evidence tied Hannah directly to the stolen funds. The lavish trips, the expensive clothes, the transfers, all of it traced back to her. Watching the two of them face the law was nothing like the shouting battles I had grown up with. This wasn't about who could yell louder or intimidate more. This was about facts, and the facts weren't on their side. My mother, Irene, surprised me most of all. One evening she came to my apartment, her hands wringing nervously. She looked smaller somehow, as if years of silence had worn her down. "I left him," she said simply, her voice trembling. "I couldn't live in that fear anymore. I should have stood up sooner, for you, for myself, but I was too scared. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to be angry, to remind her how many years I had needed her to speak up. But when I saw the tears running down her face, I realized she was finally breaking free too. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. When the court ruled, the trust was returned to its rightful place. My name was cleared, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of lies pressing down on me. My father and Hannah faced consequences they couldn't twist their way out of. Their power, their control, it all crumbled under the truth they thought they could bury. Standing outside the courthouse, I felt a quiet strength settle over me. For so long, I had been the family scapegoat, the one they thought they could silence. But now, I wasn't just surviving their betrayal, I was free of it. The future stretched out, uncertain but mine to claim. I had my independence back, my name untangled from their schemes. And for the first time, I felt ready to live without their shadows following me. The following year, Thanksgiving felt completely different. My own dining table was smaller than the one I grew up around, but the space felt warmer. The kitchen carried the smell of roasted turkey and fresh bread, and soft music played in the background. For the first time in a long while, the holiday didn't feel like a performance. It felt like home. Grandma sat at the head of the table, her eyes shining as she helped herself to mashed potatoes. My mother sat beside her, calmer than I had ever seen her. She no longer had to glance over her shoulder or measure every word in fear. A few cousins who had stood by me joined us too, their laughter filling the room in a way I never thought possible. We ate slowly, talking about ordinary things, the weather, work, even silly memories that made us laugh until our sides hurt. But beneath the light conversation, there was something deeper. Every smile, every clink of a glass carried a sense of relief. We weren't just eating a holiday meal. We were mending wounds. At one point, I caught Grandma watching me. She didn't say anything, but her look told me she was proud. I thought back to that night a year ago, to her hand gripping mine under the heavy silence of the old dining room. She had been the only one brave enough to save me from what was waiting. If I hadn't listened, I knew exactly how my life would have turned out, and it wouldn't have been this. After dessert, we lingered at the table, no one rushing to leave. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand, her face soft but serious. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. I swallowed hard, unable to answer right away, but I squeezed back. It wasn't perfect between us yet, but it was better. We were both free, and that was a start. As the night wound down, I stood by the window and looked out at the quiet street. The memory of the old house and everything that happened there flickered in my mind, sharp and painful. But instead of fear, I felt strength. That betrayal had nearly broken me, yet it had also pushed me to take back my life. I turned toward the laughter behind me, toward the family I still had, and the peace we were building. And in that moment, I remembered the words that had changed everything. I'll never forget the sound of her voice in that moment. "Leave now." Do you think Clara made the right choice by walking away from her family's betrayal, or should she have tried to forgive them and start over? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.